Welcome to this podcast. I'm your host, Zach Schwartz, and joining me today for only his second appearance. I can't believe, we've tried to plan this one for a while, fell through, I took a break, all this stuff, but it's the knowledgeable and great Parshva Sanghvi joining me again today. How you doing, Parshva?
I'm doing good. Happy to be back on for a second time, and I'm glad that it's in person. I was telling you about that. I think the last time it was over Skype, and we had a little bit of technical difficulties and things like that, but I think being here in person feels more natural, more conversational, and I'm glad.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cues you can pick up too. Sometimes I accidentally cut people off when I'm talking through Skype and stuff like that, just because I can't, really it's delayed, all that stuff like that. And obviously, I'm the idiot that had to have friends in Ohio and in Florida, so someone's always going to be over Skype. But either way, it's nice that today at least we're in person to do this one for sure. And there's a lot of topics. I looked back at our first episode. We did it right in the summer. The election was coming up, and we were talking about how COVID affected that. We were talking about the protests and Black Lives Matter, all that stuff. And we've now had impeachment trials. We've had Super Bowls. We've had everything. We have our pick of the litter here, and of course, this is where I'll say that we didn't write any notes for this episode. So I figured Parshva and I have such great conversations when we just hang out that we'll figure it out where it goes here.
Yeah, we're just gonna freestyle this thing completely
and do that thing. So I guess I'll start. The Don is out of office.
He is.
He's actually out of office.
Yeah, I think there was a period of time, between the election being over and him actually leaving office, and a lot of things happened between then. He really escalated how badly he wanted to stay in office. He kept discounting the election, the Capitol Hill riots, obviously, protests or whatever you want to call it, like the rush of domestic terrorists into the Capitol building, which I've never seen something like that in my life. Never expected such a high government level. I think they'd have top security there. I don't know how they got in.
Yep.
You would think, any sort of federal building would be very, very difficult to just rush in like that. So when I saw the footage of that happening, I was shocked. But he's finally gone. Very eventful sort of period. Very divisive president, I can say that. But I think now with Biden coming in, he seems a lot more like, Obama level politics. Very moderate. Doesn't really seem like he's going to cause too many big shockwaves or anything like that, but I think that's sort of what the country needs right now. I think we've had a lot of excitement, and now it's back to boring old traditional politics.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember for the time the Capitol Hill stuff too. I was chills down my spine. I'd never seen something like that before. I don't think any of us have. We've seen stuff like that happen in other countries. We've seen terrorist bombings and school shootings, but something like that where it's our nation's capital is literally being attacked, basically. Maybe not attack's the right word, but just riots and stuff like that were happening. There's that type of situation there is insane. And I agree with you. I think Biden's main task, I think, is just going to come in here and just stabilize this. My headlines have turned from, that I get on my laptop that I don't know how to turn off, from the news, have been, they were all the stuff about what Trump says on Twitter, and Trump called this person an idiot and fired this person. Now it's just is Biden going to do this allyship with his? How's he handling Israel? All this stuff. This is okay. All right, now we're back to just regular politics, stuff like that. So
I think one thing though that if you're a Democrat, you're very happy right now just because you have control of both House Representatives and the Senate, right? So, but I kind of also see it as Biden has no excuses now. To not get the things that he wants to get done. He has control of both, parts of Congress, and he has the executive branch. I understand that the Supreme Court leans more conservative, but at the same time, they can't really reject a law per se if it follows the Constitution. They don't have as much leeway as as Congress or the president does in terms of influencing how laws get passed. So I think he really has no excuse. I think Obama, to a certain extent, still had that excuse of, I want to get all these things done, but, the Republicans are blocking me, et cetera, et cetera. But at this point, Biden really just needs to get the things that he wants to get done. I think he should work on that, yeah.
That's what I talked about with Olivia a couple of weeks ago, is that actually Obama had the same chance. In 2008, they had swept everything. And then in 2010, at the midterms, they lost it. And so that's what I'm going to be really curious to see is that if Biden starts off slowly, if, for instance, you tie this in with the vaccine rollout, if people start to get sick of the delays, which also I just want to say, if you thought the vaccine rollout was going to be efficient and that everyone's going to be vaccinated in 3 months, like you just know it just was never going to happen that way. And I think now we're actually starting to see some movement with the vaccine rollout, which is really good. And I know a lot more people. I know people compared to a month ago who said they had it versus now that many more people are in line. The lists are moving, which is really good and really positive with that. But on that same token, like I'm just curious for depending on, and this is a big question of where the Republican Party is going to go in the next year, because things can flip so quickly. If there might be not necessarily a wave, but a conservative tide back in 2022 that might then further block Biden or Harris at that point, or both, whatever, just for both for the sake of the argument.
I think it really depends on the performance of the Democrats and what sort of legislation they really push to propose. So the more sort of left-leaning, quote-unquote, radical legislation they tend to propose, there's definitely going to be that sort of Republican backlash in the next 4 years. But if they decide to go with legislation that has more bipartisan support, doesn't necessarily have to be like unanimous support, because we know that there are extreme groups on both sides that don't like how anything's ever run.
Right.
Yeah, I know a lot of people on the far left that they're like okay with Biden, but they don't love him. Like they would have preferred a Bernie Sanders, or there's talks that AOC will be running as president in the future, so they would have preferred a candidate more like that brand. But I think majority of America, no matter the sort of political discourse that takes place on Twitter or the news or whatever, I think majority of America still falls in that sort of moderate politics, where they don't want anything too extreme. And as long as Biden, which he seems like a more moderate candidate compared to the other Democratic candidates, as long as he pushes legislation that appeals to the middle, I think the Democrats have a good chance of still continuing their party power moving forward.
I think a lot of liberals too probably want, I've heard a lot of more of the left wanting Elizabeth Warren, if it wasn't Bernie, but Elizabeth Warren as that moderate progressive type person. Which obviously didn't work out there. And then, especially with, to your AOC point, she's not running for president. I don't know a lot about politics, but AOC is already so famous to the point, and I know it's not about fame. Some politicians get into it for fame. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of California, and stuff like that, but I just don't see it. I don't think it'd be AOC would run it. And of course, we've already seen the Democratic Party lock out Bernie twice from winning the presidential bid. So it wouldn't be surprising for me if something else, because AOC's loud and stuff like that. And I'm not saying she's not a good representative. I'm not saying any of that. I just don't think she's going to end up running for president. But you're right. A lot of people are clamoring for that type of bid for 2024 or 2028.
I think what the Democratic Party lacks is a charismatic leader. We haven't had an Obama or a Clinton in a while, right? If you look at all the primary candidates that ran this year, Biden is not the most charismatic out of all of them. I'd say arguably, AOC or Bernie Sanders is even more charismatic. I think what he really went on was policy and this sort of moderate tone that he was setting that, like him or hate him, Trump is very charismatic that way. And
he's a reality TV star.
Yeah, he can really get a fan following, a sort of cultish following behind him. And to a certain extent, if you look at a lot of the notable presidents that we've had in our history, they tend to be very charismatic. There aren't many presidents that are low-key, sort of... They may make better leaders, right? They may actually be good in terms of policies and things like that, but they don't tend to last as long as people who tend to win the hearts of the people.
Sure.
Right? So I think the Democrats are desperately in need for someone like that who's, again, able to capture people's hearts. Because even with Biden winning, I don't think people were very passionate about him winning. It was more so, we're kind of tired of Trump-style politics. Yeah. It wasn't so much like, oh, I love Biden, I really want Biden to win, he is my guy. I think people liked him, but I don't think there was this sort of fan following or craze behind him like we saw with Obama or we saw with Bill Clinton. Right. Kennedy is another good example of that, and when you look at the Democrat side, Reagan and Trump even
Reagan especially
are pretty good. examples in the Republican side. But yeah, I think there needs to be Democratic Party really needs to find a candidate like that.
Well, yeah, right now you look at the Democratic leadership, right? It's Biden at president. It's Nancy Pelosi still, right? Speaker of the House. It's Schumer. Is it Chuck Schumer?
Chuck Schumer, yeah, leader of the Senate.
Yeah, majority leader of the Senate.
Now,
and they've all been there for how many years? I mean, and Pelosi especially, goodness gracious. I mean,
yeah.
And
she's from Michigan though, so shout out to Michigan. Yeah, she is from Michigan, but I agree, she has been there for a while.
But there's also people like, I mean, speaking of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, who's gotten a lot of praise recently as a Democratic governor of Michigan, and so like that new blood. And honestly, I think that is, I've said this before. I don't know when I've said it, but I know I've said it to a lot of people. I think that's a direct symptom of the past 4 years of the Democrats' strategy with Trump. Every single thing about Trump was covered. What he ate, what he tweeted, even if it was because. And don't get me wrong, this is not a pro-Trump argument. Like, he's terrible. His demeanor, his actions, maybe not his actions, but like his word choice, all that stuff, terrible. Should not have been president. I didn't vote for him. Whatever you want me to say to convince you of that argument. But the Democrats focused so much on him and cried wolf so many times with Donald Trump, and then it almost cost them because they not even forgot, but they didn't focus on creating that type of new leadership. And I mean, they end up with Kamala Harris in VP, who will probably be president one day, I would imagine. I don't think Joe's going to make it 8 years if he tries to run for a successive bid. Which could work out because she's young, she's progressive, she's getting into that party. But still, there wasn't that one person that everyone could rally behind because Harris even tried to stand for president before Joe did. So I just think that they focused so much on Trump, they almost missed that development. And I will say, I was going to pose this question to you at some point. If it wasn't for COVID, Trump would have won, I think. Because if it was Biden, all right, so let's say, because Biden in February, if I recall, was gaining steam to become the nominee, right? So then you do Biden versus Trump without COVID. You said Trump's charismatic. Through rallies and all that stuff, through the campaign speeches, I mean, I'm not going to say, I mean, whatever his regiment was daily that he was on, Trump could get pumped up for a speech and pump up people. And, I mean, like we said, Biden's much a more stable option, but if we're doing that type of energy comparison, Trump's going to win that.
Yeah, if I
would have, I should say.
I think if I had to put my money on a candidate before COVID, I'd put my money on Trump. Trump didn't really handle the whole COVID situation well. Another thing that he really shot himself in the foot was raising doubt about the whole mail-in voting system.
Yeah, that was
right?
Yeah.
And that kind of caused people to mistrust the system as a whole and lowered voter turnout. Mm-hmm. And that's what he really needed, right? So I don't know who told him to do that. Maybe no one told him to do that, and he just decided to do that on his own. But I think that really cost him the election. Biden was out here saying mail-in voting, encouraging mail-in voting, et cetera, to be COVID safe, because it seems more so like the Democratic Party is more the COVID safe advocates, sure. Against rallies, things like that. Republican Party, not so much. So when Biden was, really encouraging mail-in voting and Trump was against it, I think that did a great disservice to him. I think if he would have encouraged it a little bit more, it would have been more of an even election. Yeah. I think Biden still would have won just because of how poorly Trump handled this whole COVID situation.
Yeah.
But I still think that his chances would have been increased if he wouldn't have bashed mail-in voting completely.
Yeah, and then obviously raising doubts about the election and stuff like that. Election fraud is ridiculous. Just ridiculous.
Yeah, there's no basis in any sort of reality when it comes to that. Republicans tend to compare that to how Hillary Clinton was complaining after she lost to Trump because she lost she won the popular vote, but she lost the electoral vote. Right. So there was a whole thing about Russian interference and things like that. But I think the difference is there was actual evidence of Russia spreading propaganda through all social media networks. When it comes to Facebook or Twitter or whatever other social media outlet you look at, there was tangible evidence that Russia was interfering and meddling with their elections. Now, how much did that contribute to Trump winning versus losing? He may have still won without that interference. We don't know. But the fact that that interference was present is a fact, right? Like, you could tangibly see it. This whole election fraud thing, Trump mentioned in Michigan as well that the votes were counted incorrectly, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing that I feel like people don't understand is that these voting places where they actually count the votes, there are nonpartisan people looking at the votes, there are Democratic officials looking at the votes, there are Republican officials looking at the votes. One of the nice things about having a two-party system is that both parties keep each other in check, right? If one party, like, same thing happened with Nixon, right? When he tapped the Democratic headquarters at Watergate, there was an investigation from the Democratic side. And the same thing happens if a Democrat does something bad. I'm sure Republicans will jump on that opportunity as well, right? So the corruption decreases a little bit when you have two parties opposing each other because they'll keep each other in check.
Right.
So it's very, very difficult to really rig a complete election, right?
Yeah.
Right, because first of all, there's going to be a whistleblower. No, like, if you're really trying to do a large-scale sort of rigging of the election, there's going to be someone to oust whoever is planning that. So just the whole fact, I mean, I'm one of those people, I'm very open-minded, I'm willing to hear someone out, no matter how ridiculous it may sound, like this whole election may be, okay, tell me what you have. Mm-hmm. Tell me what's your case for the election being rigged. But when you actually take a look at the case, there's nothing really substantial there, so yeah, I think that was just, he's a sore loser. What else can I say?
No, 100%. And I think it's difficult, too, because it's easy to envision voter fraud, right? And if I'm being honest, my guess is with every election there's voter fraud. And there probably has been for every single one. Is it to the point of it turning over a state, or in Trump's case, multiple states? No, I'm not saying that, but like, you're going to tell me that 100% of the 150 million ballots, right, were processed correctly. I mean, no, that's just not how math works.
And there's definitely a margin of error. And,
exactly.
That came into play, I think, when you look at Gore versus Bush.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Here in Florida, right? The votes were so close. And there's this there's this theory, Jeb Bush was the governor of Florida at the time, and he helped his brother out. Now, I'm not saying that's true or not true, who knows, right? But in that case, I think that is valid, right? Because there's a difference of like 500 votes.
It was really close.
Like very, very close. It went to like the Florida Supreme Court or something. Yeah. It was only in one state, not like in 5 states.
Right, yeah.
So it was very like concentrated, very close. Trump lost to Biden in Michigan by like thousands of votes.
Right, exactly.
The margin of error just doesn't like apply. If it was a couple of hundreds, I would have supported him in actually looking at the votes. I've tried to be as objective and like impartial as possible. Like, if someone has a good case, I'll support it. And I think if it was under 1,000, even if like under like 500 votes, I'd be like, you have a pretty strong case that this could maybe go your way if you recounted the votes. But when it's like thousands of votes towards another person, the margin of error doesn't cover that at all.
Exactly.
I think, so.
And that's where I am. I'm just like, well, like, if you were to ask me point blank, like, did I think there was election fraud? I say yes, but I'd say that with the Trump-Clinton election. I'd say that with the Obama-Romney election. I say that going back. I'm not saying it changes the outcome of the election. I'm just saying that objectively there probably
mistakes
was some
happen.
Exactly.
Definitely, yeah.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just think it's and I think that's something else that's exposed there, right? It's just really interesting how, like, this sector of the country finally has this voice. Not that, the Trump people and stuff like that. And I just wonder now, I mean, you saw it even with the impeachment trial that concluded recently, that some Republicans, and Republicans during the riot were denouncing Trump and are starting, I think, trying to move on. And there were a couple actually, I can't remember with the first impeachment trial what the voting was. But for the second one, I mean, there were 7-8 Republicans that broke ranks and shifted over and convicted Trump, including Mitt Romney, actually, who's been denouncing Trump pretty openly for a while now, which is really a really interesting evolution of his political career.
Well, to be honest, though, I think I'd expect that from Mitt Romney. I'd expect that from like a John McCain. Those guys are very like standard establishment Republicans. They're not the sort of brand of republicanism that Trump's introduced. I'd say, Senator Cruz, which I don't understand.
In the news today, we're recording this on Thursday, right? The 18th, yeah.
Thursday the 18th.
In the news again today for flying to an island,
Cancun,
right? Or
when Texas doesn't have any utilities, like no electric power or water. But I think Senator Cruz has sort of gone the Trump way. I don't know why. Trump, called his wife ugly, called his dad a potential, the illegal immigrant, things like that. So I don't know why he chose sides with Trump. I'm sure there's something for him to gain from that. But from people like John McCain, Mitt Romney, those people, even if you may disagree with their politics, I feel like in general they're quite respectable people.
Yeah.
People, there's still a lot to learn from them in terms of they are good role models, especially John McCain. I know he had a tremendous involvement as a U.S. military personnel, etc. He was a prisoner of war. He went through a lot in his life, and there's a lot to look up to in terms of endurance, persistence, discipline, etc. Loyalty to your own country, not giving in. I remember there was a story about John McCain where he asked, even though he was the captain of his squad, he asked all the squad members to be released from jail before he did. So that's truly undying loyalty to the people that you lead. But yeah, you may disagree or agree with your politics, but I think those people have a good moral character behind them, right? So when they see something that doesn't align with their ethics, their morals, even if it's from their same party, I don't think they will ever agree with it. And I think if you look at Obama, right, he had the election against Mitt Romney, he had an election against John McCain, even George Bush, he was a big critic of him. But now if you look at their relationship, obviously McCain has passed away, but now with Mitt Romney and especially George Bush, they're all very friendly with each other, right? Yeah. They don't really have a problem. So it is surprising that it was only 10 votes away from convicting Donald Trump from being impeached. So that's pretty close. He just brushed by, but I don't know if obviously I may not agree with a lot of his politics, but I don't know if he deserved to be impeached per se. And I think that's a sort of controversial take because a lot of people claim that he's responsible for inciting what happened at the Capitol building. But I think he's responsible for spreading a lot of misinformation to the public, obviously. Do I, based off of the tweets that I read and things like that, do I read into it saying that he wants people to attack a federal building or things like that? I don't know yet. Yeah. I don't know if the evidence for that is so clear cut as much as Democrats want it to be.
Right. Yeah. Because he talked about strength. He talked about they're stealing this election from us, stuff like that. But to that standpoint, I think almost this impeachment was just a referendum of the last 4 years. You're basically looking at is the entirety of Trump's rhetoric and presidency during his rhetoric, or with his rhetoric during the presidency, led up to this moment. And you could argue it has, because without him, obviously, stuff like this wouldn't happen. These type of people who would storm the Capitol wouldn't have a voice in mainstream politics. However, that's very circumstantial evidence to try to indict him on that. And I think that's what ended up happening with it. And I just think it ended up being a referendum on his presidency.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the way he sort of led was very similar to the way authoritarian leaders lead, right? They have a big following, sort of mass propaganda through social media outlets, a general distrust in anything anyone else is saying except what he's saying, right? The media is wrong, except the media that I manufacture. Even started going after Fox News, right? And by the end of it, he started going against his own vice president.
Yep.
Right? So those are some classic examples. Now, in terms of legislation and policy, I would say that he was more of libertarian in that sense, or more he decreased regulations, decreased government oversight. So I know when a lot of people say the sort of counter argument to people saying that Trump's authoritarian is no, he's not. He decreased a lot of government oversight and overreach in many of the agencies that we have today.
Yeah.
However, I think based on his leadership characteristics and his leadership traits, he exhibited a lot of the things that a lot of dictators around the world very quite frankly do, right?
Yeah.
There's a sort of brainwashing of people that only the reality that I tell you is the true one. Everything else that people are saying around you it's all false. It's all they're all ploying against you. I'm the only one trying to save you. I'm the only one trying to fight for you.
Right.
Which is very classic, and I'm surprised that people didn't understand that was going on. But yeah, it's I mean, as far as I've been alive, I haven't been alive too long, but as far as I've been alive, I've never really seen a president like this. You know, it's definitely unconventional. Definitely broke a lot of traditions, right? There's a certain level of unwritten rules that all presidents follow by, and he didn't care about any of them at all.
Correct.
Which some people may say is a good thing, right? It's anti-establishment, you know, anti-traditional, whatever you want to call it. I think in certain cases, like going against the grain, going against the norm is a good thing, but in certain cases it's not. So
yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed necessarily. I've said this before, and people have kind of been like, "What do you mean? Like that's not right." Like that, I'm not opposed to non-politicians having the office of president if you can if you could set policy correctly or just whatever like ideas you want, and then you can then put people. You're good at picking people who have that experience to go in charge of your departments and stuff like that. Like I'm not opposed to that. I just think Trump was unpresidential and everything. Like you said, there's a certain kind of norms you have to do, at least once again with your rhetoric. I think that leading the country to not lead the country to a point where we've been, I don't know if it's been, people say we were the most divisive we've ever had been. Well, we did fight a civil war, so we can't use that term. Like there has been an American Civil War, and even if you look back, I'm reading the biography about Alexander Hamilton right now that was the basis of the movie. You read it back then when they're arguing over whether they replaced the Articles of Confederation, stuff like that, where the two-party system started. It's pretty nasty. They'd just be like, I don't like your policies. I don't like you either. Let's have a duel and kill each other. Like there have been, you know, but then again,
I think Alexander Hamilton and who was the other guy? He had a duel and that's how he died. Right?
Yeah, I haven't gotten to that point in the book yet.
Oh my bad.
Spoiler!
I'm sorry.
Spoiler alert from 1805. No, it was Aaron Burr.
Aaron Burr,
who ended up killing Hamilton, and Hamilton shot off.
Did he offend his wife or something? I remember. All I remember about Hamilton was
here you go. Let me flip through.
He started the National Bank. That's what I remember.
Hamilton was the first Secretary of Treasury.
Yeah, and him and Jefferson often conflicted because
Correct.
Jefferson was more of a conservative when it came to fiscal policy. He didn't really want to loan money from international organizations, things like that. Hamilton was of the belief that if he loaned the money right now, we can expedite our economic growth because America's a new country and then pay off those loans using the profits that we make. So Hamilton was a little bit more riskier. Jefferson was a little bit more on the conservative side fiscally.
Correct.
But that's a little history lesson for people
I
listening.
I know it's interesting, I think, because, you know, Hamilton's actually so big into the news. Like, I didn't know, like, because this biographer, Ron Chernow, is a very prominent biographer. He's done John D. Rockefeller, he's done George Washington, like, those. I believe he's done Jefferson as well. So, like, then I see Alexander Hamilton, and I was like, I know Hamilton, but, like, how influential was Hamilton? Like, obviously he was a founding father. Even, like, Benjamin Franklin's more characterized in the popular culture, right? I'm reading this book, and I was just like, holy shit, Like, Hamilton was so influential. Hamilton's more influential in politics than George Washington was.
Oh, yeah. George Washington as a political leader, per se.
Yes.
I think what he did good was set a certain precedence for presidents, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Set the 2-term limit, you know, because people still wanted him to run the 3rd term, right?
Yes.
And he could have very easily. I think a lot of men in his place with that much power over a new country would do the same.
Yeah.
Right? Like they would run for the 3rd term. They would run for the 4th term. They'd want their kids to be in power. I think one of the nice things that he did was he sort of set the boundaries and set the limits of how far presidential power can go. And I think there's a lot of respect for that. Now, when it comes to other places of leadership, he was very popular because he was the leading general of the Revolutionary War. Again, his general skills weren't the best either. But I think he had a lot of heart. And I think he was a good person on the inside. He had a good character, at least for those times. Now, if he were to take the moral codes of this times and apply to that time, that's completely different. But for the time, he was considered a good person. I still believe he was a pretty good person at his core. And yeah, I think in that sense, I really respect him as a president. He didn't take the power grab where the opportunity was to do so.
Right, I agree.
So, and that is very hard to do, and I don't think a lot of people can do that, you know?
Yeah, because he wanted the Union to be separate for what he wanted. Because Washington and Hamilton are very close, so it covers it a lot. Like, I've just read this. So he wanted to step aside to make sure the Union, the country, could be separated from him and not seem I can't say the word.
Monarchist.
Yeah, exactly.
And he was also against a two-party system.
Yes.
But Hamilton and Jefferson really were the first ones to create this two-party system because their brand of politics was completely different, right?
Yeah, Hamilton started the Federalists and was the first Federalist.
Right.
But he was so divisive himself, he couldn't run for president.
Right.
Which is why John Adams ran for president, actually.
John Adams is a completely...
he was not great.
I don't think he was a good guy.
He was not a good guy.
Yeah.
But have you ever played Assassin's Creed?
A little bit, but not... the one in... I think the one that took place in Egypt...
Oh, so you're old time one. Okay. I was saying because there's an American Revolution one where you play alongside George Washington, whatever.
Right.
And then there's a DLC, downloadable content extra, where George Washington gets his powerful staff and becomes a dictator, and then you have to fight like a souped up George Washington. Yeah, it was really funny.
Funny.
But yeah, I don't know, just a little video game talk there. For us, but yeah.
But what were we talking about? Trump's impeachment trial. Right.
Yeah, we went through that. I feel like a good amount. I wonder. Something I was going to ask you too. Like, I know there's been talk about Trump creating the Patriot Party. A new party. Which honestly, I wouldn't hate. Just so those people who really believe that and think he's Jesus can go off and just be outside of mainstream politics now. And I think that's what a lot of Republicans want as well. Mm-hmm. And just see. I'm just curious too. Like the Democrats had a sliding doors moment right after Hillary Clinton, and they're probably going to have it coming up because this past cycle really didn't. They didn't really sell anything, right? Like Harris is going to be VP, will be president one day. At least
you think so?
I don't think Biden's making it 4 years.
That's interesting. I think he'll make it 4 years. He has the best hair in the world, quite literally.
Sure, but I will. Okay, that's why I have to clarify. Like, I don't think he's going to die per se. I just think he's going to step aside at some point.
I see. I don't know if I'd be too happy though with a Kamala Harris presidency. Although I'm a South Asian individual, right?
Sure,
she's half South Asian. I have to...
Big win.
I'm obligated to a certain extent to be very proud that South Asians have made it this far. But other than that fact, I'm not the biggest fan of Kamala Harris. She comes across a bit ingenuine to me. Have you seen some of her interviews? Mm-hmm. So, sort of like the laughter that she does is kind of fake. I can tell she's kind of putting on a show. I'm sure she's good in terms of what she actually did. She seems like one of those very type A personalities that will... do whatever to sort of accomplish whatever goal that they need to. She seems like a very career type politician, and she puts on that sort of show to have the public like her, but it doesn't really come across as genuine at all. Well, that's at least my analysis of it.
Yeah, well, she was the DA in California. She was a DA in California, which is interesting.
And she was quite conservative in terms of her policy. She was very anti-marijuana, right?
Yes.
She was anti... What's it called? Truancy, right? When you skip school?
Yes.
Yeah, so kids got in trouble for that. And I think her dealing with law enforcement, honestly, I didn't really like her record that much. I think she's very heavy-handed, and I think law enforcement requires a certain level of nuance that I don't think she had in her career. So even as a South Asian, being very proud that a South Asian could make it that far, I can still be critical of how, her career has been up to this point. Right? Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if I'd like her to be president, to be very honest with you. I think
interesting.
A main reason why Biden picked her was to appeal to the minorities, obviously. But I think minorities are smarter than that, too, to a certain extent. You're not just going to be sold because she's a minority. She has to really sell us. I mean, at least for me, she has to sell me on her policy, right?
Right.
So, yeah, again, very proud that a South Asian was able to make it that far. I don't think my parents would have ever dreamed that a South Asian individual could ever become vice president, and let alone potentially...
How dare you?
Let alone potentially president. But at the same time, I think, like all politicians, they deserve criticism and they deserve that sort of scrutiny because they're making decisions on behalf of us. So
I'll save my Harris point for a second. What constitutes South Asia, though? I've never really heard of that.
So South Asia...
We got a good map right here.
Sure, yeah. So South Asia...
There's a bigger one right there.
Would be the Indian subcontinent, basically.
Okay.
So it would be like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, now as it's called. Surround basically brown people, but not Middle Eastern people. If for a lack of a better way to say that, you know.
Okay.
So
you said it, not me. Let the record reflect that.
Let the brown person say that.
The cancel culture.
Let the brown person say that. But technically, all those countries that I listed, that's what it is. But in a layman's term, brown people is considered South Asian.
Okay,
people.
got it. There we go.
So yeah. That
very good, very good. Okay, I will not repeat that, but I understand that. Okay, and I mean your Harris point, you're right, because I think too, like there's a big push for the Democratic Party to become more liberal, right?
Yeah,
people like
she's a female, she's a minority, right?
Right, but then if you actually take that deeper step though, like you're kind of pointing out, you're like, wait a minute, this is pretty conservative. This is pretty conservative, especially because you would think senator from California, like they're going to be really liberal, but record doesn't necessarily show that.
And if you're a true Republican, I wouldn't be too upset about the people who got picked into office.
Agreed.
They're very middle down the line politicians. They're not going to, if there was someone like Bernie or AOC or like people on that sort of left. Even Warren to a certain extent. People like that, if they were picked, I think you would feel a little bit more, worrisome. But with Biden and Kamala Harris being picked from a purely policy point of view, if you had to have a Democrat win, that's not the worst pick for you for your brand of politics, I'd say.
Do you think that was part of the strategy by Democrats?
Oh, 100%. I think that's one of the reasons why Bernie didn't win. I don't know if that, how that whole primary process took place was fair, not fair.
Little sus.
It was a little sus, I agree. I think the DNC had a little bit of a role in terms of manipulating who really won the election. Obviously, I'm sure the Republican Party didn't want Trump to win when he first ran, right?
But he
won. But he won by a landslide. So like there wasn't anything that they could really fix. But the way Biden won against Bernie, it was in the margins, right? And I think they could manipulate that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and you notice when people started dropping out, right? Like Harris dropped out early. And all of a sudden, like Pete dropped out, and Warren was the last domino to fall. But it was a little suspect.
I have a theory. There's no real evidence for it. I just have a feeling. I think Biden reached out to Warren and said, "If you drop out, I'll make you the VP," and then didn't fulfill that promise.
Wow.
I think so. So I think the top two candidates for being Biden's VP was Kamala and Elizabeth Warren.
Because he did say he was picking a woman very early on, correct? Yeah. As his running mate, I believe. And then Stacey Abrams, I remember, was mentioned as a possible, but...
Which I think picking women is important. But I think it's, to us, counterintuitively, it goes against them if you're just picking them for being a female, if that makes sense. I think definitely there needs to be more, women involved in politics, and that's always a good thing to see. But sometimes I feel like, Biden picked her because she was a woman, not because of the things that she could bring to the table. And that's sort of the thing that I have a problem with. Like, because she was a minority, because she was a South Asian, not because of her sort of policies and things like that. Yeah. So, I'm not against. I think everyone should be represented in our government, right? Yeah. And I think everyone should have a voice. I think there's strength in diversity. But I also think that there shouldn't be this sort of token diversity where, okay, we are only including you because that sort of discounts them, right? That's like saying, I don't care about your experiences, I don't care about what you actually bring to the table, I only care about you based on arbitrary facts. Yeah. So...
No, and I think it's a tough almost line sometimes because, like you said, like we have not had diversity is incredible and it's really important, and there's great people across all walks of races and ethnicities and all that stuff, but it's a tough line to walk because as a nation we have not been close to the diversity we should be, not even close. In a lot of facets, in a lot of different disciplines, just across the board. Even looking at our health, how our health socioeconomic class right now breaks down in that standpoint is the same way. But to your point, it then gets into the tough thing where it's like it's the same reason a lot of people I think have issues with affirmative action, right? You're getting into that kind of standpoint where it's like, okay, but if we put a number of this ethnicity we want and this stuff, and that gets hazy and it gets tough, and that's where it's a lot of like judgment type of things where it's like this doesn't feel organic
anymore. Although I am a big advocate of affirmative action.
Sure,
I'll tell you why.
Okay,
I'll tell you why.
Wait.
I think a lot of the times people misperceive affirmative action as a quota system.
Okay,
right?
And I certainly just characterized it as that, so please.
Right, so that's, so I think, yeah,
please.
I think people think that affirmative action is, we need a certain amount of, like, you know, African Americans, we need a certain amount of, like, Latinos, we need a certain amount of Asian Americans, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't, maybe it's being executed that way, but I don't think that's the sort of intention behind affirmative action.
Okay.
Because I've done a little bit of research into it, you know, for several, like, because I've had questions about it too, you know, like, am I really getting into this college because of my merit, or am I getting into it because I'm, well, actually, in terms of college education, I'm disadvantaged when it comes to being a brown person, but...
you could argue not, though, being Indian. I mean, it's the same thing with Asians, actually, they say are almost more disadvantaged than... wasn't there a lawsuit recently with Yale?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, like, Indians and Asian Americans...
That's the one minority that's
are going to be discredited. But I think the reason why is because... It is an quota system. I think what affirmative action is doing is it's telling colleges to look at diversity as a plus point. And I think that's a good thing. So it's saying that when you're looking at someone's application, don't just focus on their scores or their experiences, but also how their cultural background ties into it. Because when you have a greater diversity at an academic institution, it ends up being better for all students who are there, right? When you have someone from a similar background, similar cultural background, economic background, etc., I think it limits your worldview, right? So affirmative action saying, and I think affirmative action not only applies to race, it also applies to economics, right? So what your economic background is.
Yeah.
Thus, if you are more on the lower income side, you have a slight advantage compared to someone who's more on the higher income side, right?
Sure.
But I think those things are important because it's bringing this sort of diversity, and it's telling people who are recruiting people to colleges to take that diversity into consideration. I think if I were to characterize affirmative action, I think it's more subtle than just we need these many of people of blah 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 and these many people blah 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 blah. I think it's more so take it as a plus point. Don't completely ignore it. And I can get behind that. Now, am I saying that all college institutions are applying it that way? I don't think so, right?
Sure.
I think certain colleges do have that sort of rigid quota system, but they don't like to admit it, right? Sure. And that's why they've been sued. But I still like the intent and the idea behind it. I think a world without affirmative action, you'll see colleges that are a lot less diverse. And that's actually to the detriment of the students going there, not to their benefit.
100%.
And it's actually a detriment to the society as a whole because now you're having people coming out of college who have a very limited worldview compared to students coming out of college that have experienced people from all different races, all different socioeconomic backgrounds. Like coming here to UCF, I've been in contact with so many different types of people.
Yep, me too. Yeah.
Right? And learned about so many different types of experiences that I wouldn't have learned about in my town in Canton, Michigan. In the sort of bubble that I was. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful for that, right? And I'm grateful for that sort of diversity. And I think it's expanded my worldview. And I think it's a great service to people who are going to college to get exposure to that.
Right. I agree. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for going through that. Because if we don't have that type of system, then it just reinforces what happens, like I said earlier, with the fact that minorities tend to have lower socioeconomic status. So then you don't consider that stuff. And then that just gets reinforced in society. You end up making a truly class-based society, especially with the prize of the education and college degree being the crown jewel of youth. For most people, I'm not saying it's the best for everything, but it's so sought after right now in our country. And
I think sometimes people in like positions of power don't see it. They see it as a bad thing, right? Like if you are of a privileged class, but I think that may be true in the short term, right? Yeah, people in privileged class may be disadvantaged in terms of college education, et cetera, or even like the elite, like the top 1% in terms of income, they might like the income inequality, right? They might like the fact that they get to hoard so much money.
100%.
But I think in the long term, it causes chaos. It causes this sort of instability in society. And then you have revolutions like what happened in Russia or happened in China, these sort of Marxist type revolutions because of the inequality becoming so great that people are like, what, screw the system. I don't care about the system because it's not working for 90% of people. So I think a certain level of inequality is good because it states that there's a merit-based system here,
correct,
right? If everyone's equal, that means that it doesn't matter what you do, right? Like you're going to be at the same position as everyone else. But things like, inequality or this lack of diversity, I think it's not only bad for the people, obviously the people who are suffering from it, but also for the people who are taking advantage of it in the long run. I think it's bad for everyone involved. So I think it's something that everyone can get behind.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. Like you have that type of thing that you can advance up the system, you can advance down it if you blow it, all stuff like that. And I just want to put out there too, people. That's how you educate someone right there. Is what Parshva just did. You don't yell at them on Twitter. Can't yell at someone on Twitter and expect them to listen. It's not how this works.
Twitter's definitely not the place for discourse. At least not meaningful discourse.
What do you mean? You get 280 characters. How can you not say? How can you not say a complicated thought in 280 characters, Parshva? Come on.
That's true.
No, I'm kidding. But no, I think this is something that, I mean, it's part of the reason why I started this podcast way back when, and I like to, even though I take month-long breaks at times to finish up schoolwork and stuff, that I really like to bring it back and talk about, because it's great conversation, as you said here, sit here and just eye to eye talk about things and talk about even complex issues, because there'd be certain people that wouldn't touch the topics we've talked about today if knowing that it'd go online. But like, you know, if you listen to the full length episode, you get the context, you understand that, and that type of the conversation that surrounds that.
Yeah, and I think there should be this sort of what I see right now, a lot of it is a lot of judgment. You know, going a lot of judgment perceived on people for having an opinion different than you. And even if you may not agree with that opinion, even if you think that opinion is completely wrong, whatever, I don't think that it's necessarily okay to judge the person stating that opinion. Right? You can judge the opinion, you can attack the opinion itself, but I believe, right, that majority of Americans, majority of people are good people. They're good people with the right intentions, and they're trying to only do like the best for their family, their people close to them, people they care about. So even if they have an opinion that you disagree with, I think instead of judging them or instead of attacking them, take the time to understand them, right? Like, take the time to actually understand, okay, how were they raised? Where did they come from? What was their background? Because I think that's how real change happens. When you point fingers at people or say that, oh, you know what, you're a racist or blah, 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 et cetera, that's not doing anything except just pushing them into the shadows where they still exist with their ideology. They still have the same thoughts that they have. But if you take the time to understand them, take the time to understand the person you hate the most, right? You'll probably find something in common with them. You'll probably find where they're coming from, even if you maybe disagree how their life took place, even if where they're coming from is bad. I think it allows for more change to happen, allows for more empathy to happen. As future physicians, you know, empathy is very important, right? And I think that should be employed in all cases. You should always be empathetic towards people that you disagree with, even hate, still take the time to understand where they're coming from, even if you disagree with them. I think that's very important.
Well, this is a big rhetoric, you know, coming up to the election. This ties into what you're saying, is that there became a thing on Twitter and a lot of things. If you vote for Trump, you're racist. But then what ended up happening during the election was that Trump actually gained with Hispanics, especially here in Miami-Dade. Not in Miami-Dade, we're not in Miami-Dade County, but in Florida and Miami-Dade, and won Florida easily for the first, like, by a wide margin that I could think of. And also gained with the African-American community from his 2016 run. And I once again don't disagree with the fact that a lot of things Trump says are racist and target minorities and are incorrect. But yet he still gained with those communities that he was literally, you know, for better lack of a term, shit talking and stuff like that. Which, so then it's like, well, okay, then if you're saying to a white person that you're racist for voting for Trump, but then Trump gained 6 points or whatever the final number was with African Americans, those things don't hold up. There needs to be a deeper dive there.
And I think the main thing that comes with that is, especially with the Democratic Party, I think they were focusing on the wrong things when handling Trump. I think first of all, they kept attacking Trump's character and things like that. And they were also not focusing on things that they will do to improve your lives. They're just like, this guy's bad, you know, I don't like this guy, et cetera. But they weren't saying, okay, how am I different than this person? How can I help you in ways that he can't? And also another thing is, I've seen that, you know, as college students, we look at the world a lot more, you know, optimistically.
Yes.
Right? We look at the world as like, oh, we want to change everything, you know, like, we want the world to be this happy place, et cetera. Even though I know a lot of college students may be facing financial hardship, like, things like that, they still don't have this sort of, like, you know, they don't have kids to, most of them, don't have kids to come back home to and have to feed, right? They don't have the sort of daily struggles that a lot of the majority of people voting, right? Like in the middle-aged crowd, like, 35 to like, 65, etc. The problems that they have to face. And the problems that they have to face is, how do I bring food to the table, right? They care about certain, global current event issues, things like that. But I think their main priority is, what can this candidate do for me?
Right.
Right? It's very self-centered in that sense.
Yes.
They don't care about society. Well, they do to a certain extent, but not as much as we do. So what they see is, when they look at Trump, is, yes, they look at the rhetoric, right? They look at the sort of racial undertones, things like that. But for a lot of people, tax cuts is a big thing. For us, it may not be, right? A lot of college students don't earn that sort of income that, like, middle-aged people do, right? Obviously, with the work experience and things like that, you tend to make more money. The more money you make, the less you want the government to take of it. Right? So they have a completely different perspective on things, right? They obviously care, like, about Black Lives Matter. They don't want African Americans to be villainized by the police system. But at the same time, they also want to keep more money in their pockets to feed their families, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily always a bad thing to want more money, especially when it's going towards supporting people you care about. Yeah. And I think a lot of times why Trump won with people was not because of his rhetoric or because people are inherently racist and they like the things that he was saying. I know a lot of Trump supporters that didn't like the things that he was saying.
Yeah.
Right? But what they liked was the fact that he was going to help them out economically. What he liked was the fact that he wasn't going to shut down the economy because of the coronavirus. And if they're a restaurant owner, right, they're not going to lose their business. That sort of direct implications in their life mattered more than the sort of mega implications such as the Black Lives Matter movement or, like, economic inequalities as a whole. What they cared about was, I'm a restaurant owner, I'm a small business owner. Trump's proposing to open up the economy. Biden's proposing to shut it down for a little bit. I'm going to starve if I don't have my restaurant going. And that's what they cared about. So just to say that because you support Trump, you're automatically racist, you're automatically a bigot, that's definitely unfair. You have to, again, it comes to that understanding, right? Understand where these people come from. Obviously, there are certain people that are racist and like the things that he says. Right?
Yeah.
But there are also, I wouldn't even say that's majority of people that support Trump. Agreed. I think that's just the most vocal Trump supporters.
Yes. Yeah. That's the far right. That's
the far right. That's the most vocal. That's on your social media, bombarding people. I also think that something that, Trump really capitalized on was this sort of nationalism that I feel like is one of those weak human tendencies, right? Like one of our more primitive human tendencies, like tribalism, things like that.
Yeah.
But that's something that he really capitalized on. I think he capitalized on a lot of things that humans are sort of weak on, like tribalistic behaviors, fear of others, right? Proud of being like your own group, your sort of nationalistic point of view. Provide, like I said, spreading this fear that the establishment is against you. There was a lot of fear tactics. There was a lot of things that humans have always fallen prey to in the past. This isn't anything new. I think maybe in recent American history has a leader come like this, but if you look at global history, a lot of leaders ruled in the way that Trump did.
Yeah, just in other countries though, and then we've seen kind of
how it takes place.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I think scared a lot of people as well, is that you could reasonably see a line down the hill where if Trump, for instance, maybe in January, he does just say, nope, I have the military behind me, I'm staying here. And then it's like, wow. And that was a concern for a while, but thankfully it's not in that case. Because, we have this republic going, and we've had it for a while, and I think, it's worked pretty well so far.
Yeah, and I think one thing is, I think media outlets definitely help Trump, actually. By bashing on him so much, I think people like a fair fight, right? And I think people like this. They expect their news outlets to be objective. And as much as I can say that, like media outlets like CNN, MSNBC, etc., they do have valid points in criticism against Trump. They've never highlighted any good thing about Trump.
Yeah.
Very rarely, right? And people like that sort of impartiality. They don't like a biased judge. So I think that caused people to actually lose more trust in the media. I think the media actually shot themselves in the foot in that sense, by only reporting things that were bad about Trump. And yes, there were negatives, right? But I think there were also certain positives, like what he did for veterans, etc., that they could have highlighted, and they could have regained the trust the public had in the media in saying, oh, okay, they don't just harp on his negatives, they also talk about some of the positives that he does. But what the media is always the downside, the glass half empty, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think people like that. I don't think people like when the ref is, and I think people have viewed sort of the media as a ref, now not so much anymore, but before I think they sort of viewed them as except Fox News is completely on the right. I think most people knew that Fox News was biased, but I think especially major media outlets like CNN, right? CNN was considered mainly impartial. Yes, they supported like the Clintons a lot. They started calling the Clinton News Network.
Right, that's right.
But for the most part, they were considered like an objective source.
Yeah, not anymore.
No, not at all. And I don't blame people for not believing that. I've watched CNN, and as someone who does lean slightly to the left, right, I still take objection to some of the things, some of their portrayals of Trump. Anything he does, he breathes, and they complain about it, right?
Right.
And maybe that they're looking at it from more a sensational point of view. They may drive up their ratings, drive up the amount of income, but from a journalistic point of view, they've lost their credibility completely in these last 4 years. So.
Right. Going into a post-Trump world, what is like a couple things, or maybe just the biggest thing you want to see from Biden now and Harris, almost just kind of getting with the Senate and House, like you mentioned earlier, and it basically just time to hit the reset button a bit in the last 4 years. What's the biggest thing you want to see out of their presidency?
I've always believed in moving forward, right? So that's why I've disagreed with Trump on a lot of things, because he's always been make America great again, reverting back to this past, right? And that's sort of the conservative ideal, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I'm a lot more forward-looking. So I would like to see America become a little bit more modernized, right? First of all, we need to do a lot more in terms of environment, something that I really care about, than we've been doing. I think in the environmental crisis that we're having right now is a very objective crisis. I'm very surprised that it's been politicized as much as it has, because there's clear facts pointing to what's going on. It's not as much of an opinion-based thing, right? Another thing that I like to see is a little bit more involvement in the world, right? So Trump has a lot more of an isolationist /
you listen to me, I make errors all the time, don't worry.
Nationalistic approach to politics, which I don't like as much. I don't think that's the way forward. I think I've always believed collaboration with other countries and reaching out. And I also think that for us to stay that sort of dominant world player, we need to go out there, right? We need to have leverage. I think we've lost a lot of the leverage that we used to have with countries because of Trump. We got out of WHO, right? We have soured our relationships with the EU.
Paris Peace Accords dropped out of those as well.
Yes.
Those tie in your two things.
The climate change, yeah. So I think those two things I really want to see. I kind of like the way Biden is handling COVID. I'm not big on lockdowns, though. I'll say that. I think a complete shutdown of the economy. So there's always a pros and cons to that, right? Yeah. You're saving lives, but you're also damaging lives economically, which is, I think people especially a lot of people that I've seen in like the pre-medical field, they only care about the health aspect. And I agree that it's important, right? No doubt. But you have to look at everything holistically. And a lot of people don't take into account the sort of economic damage that COVID has taken place. And yes, numbers may sound boring and things like that, but it has real life implications on people's lives. Like people have to sell their houses. A lot of people become suicidal because of losing their jobs, right? You've invested 20 years into a restaurant or any other small business, and now because of things that weren't your fault, right? Which is what hurts a lot of people, right? This wasn't my fault. This was an external virus coming in. This is not me handling the books wrong. This is not my product being bad. This is international virus affecting us, and they feel like they have no control over it, and they feel like they're being punished unjustly, right? Yeah. So that's a big mental toll that takes place on someone. I think even from a health point of view, right? That's still a big health concern as well. So I definitely think maybe temporary lockdowns is okay, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but not the sort of like months, especially what we've seen in Michigan, right? Like no dine-in until very recently. I think there's a certain pro and con that you have to take into consideration.
Yeah.
I really like the mask policy. I think everyone should be mandated masks. It's very easy to do, very cheap, right? It's not like it's an affordability thing, right? Even the government hands out masks if you really need one.
Conceptually makes sense too. You're blocking stuff from your face.
I don't think, and it's also not that big of a lifestyle change.
No, it's not.
Right? So I think masks are the pros versus the cons. The pros vastly outnumber the cons, right?
Yeah.
I think social distancing is good. I think a lot of the things that Biden's been saying, I like the fact that he's planning to put barriers in restaurants. The fact that he's planning to improve ventilation systems in schools. Now, where he gets the money for that, let's find out. I feel like that is often a problem with Democrats. They promise big, but then they never have
the funds.
So where are the funds coming from?
Yeah, they try to raise taxes. Everyone's
I like the pipe dream, but where's the money coming from?
Everyone's
right?
Like, yeah, actually, I don't want my taxes raised.
Right? They never tell you where the money's coming from. But if he's actually able to implement that, I'd be very supportive of that. I think that all those measures are very effective in terms of combating COVID, but also allowing businesses to run.
Yeah, and I just want to stick with what you were saying with the mental health aspect.
Right.
Same thing. People come to me being pre-med, applying to medical school. They're like, oh, so you just want everything to be locked down and everyone to be safe. I was like, well, from a health, not even getting the economic perspective, from a health perspective, being alone and isolated from everybody has severe mental health issues and stuff like that. And now, I think one of the big things we're going to see as we transition into being in doctoral roles and stuff like that is that we are now talking about mental health so much more than anybody else ever has, and that's fantastic. But then people are now forgetting that with COVID and stuff like that, and I think it's a really troubling thing. I mean, my brother, for instance, is a freshman at Bowling Green, and I understand the rules. Ohio's different than Florida. Thankfully, we're allowed on campus. We're having homecoming week in a couple weeks because we're able to do stuff outdoors, socially distanced here in Florida. Can't do that in Bowling Green. There's a foot of snow right now out there, and he struggled for a bit. He really did. I mean, he's fine. I'm not saying like that, but just in terms of he's like, I was coming here to make friends, and I can't. There's not those type of events that you and I had a couple years ago to make those friends. Even clubs, like social clubs, they're not the same. We've both been treasurer of Pre-Med AMSA, thankfully, but we didn't have that type of mechanism to go out and do that. So just from economics, completely agree with you as well. Part of that's the balance that plays into this, but just also the people from the health perspective that miss that you have to weigh it both. And am I going to go up there and tell Dr. Fauci he's wrong? No, because that balance is very delicate across all areas. It's very different across all areas of the country as well, which is a big issue. So, and of course I've been a big climate, I mean, if you're not really a big climate change guy, I don't really know what you're doing, but no, I agree. I just think there's so many renewable energy resources right now we need to invest in and figure out. And in fact, I even people hate on nuclear power even, but you look at how, if you do it correctly, obviously,
definitely,
nuclear power is very clean, and people don't even understand that. But obviously, solar, wind,
those are one of the arguments where I don't understand. I tend to understand a lot of perspectives, but when people are like, "Oh, I don't really think the climate change thing is
doesn't make any sense."
Because it's so objective. Other things like how you even deal with COVID is a subjective measure because you have to consider everything holistically.
Sure.
But when it comes to the climate, we only have this one Earth, right? And as far as we know, we don't yet have the technology to outsource and go to Mars or something.
Elon Musk does. Musk is going to do it.
And it's slowly coming in.
Elon's going to do it.
Richest man in the world right now.
I know.
But yeah, I think we're not there yet, and I think more importantly, I think we should take care of the home that we have, right?
Yeah,
that's the general thing. When you don't make your home dirty and then go somewhere else, you take care of what you have. And I think even they say that environmental concern is actually a conservative thing, right? Because conservative means you want to conserve things. Teddy Roosevelt was the first one to have national parks. He was a Republican.
Very big, yeah.
Right?
And somehow that switched.
Yeah, I don't know how, because I think why it switched? Because oil and gas companies lobby the Republican Party and they don't like all these climate measures. But I think that they will be the first ones to actually hop onto the renewable energy trend.
They are starting to switch over,
right?
ExxonMobil,
because they have the funds and they have the connections and they have the experience, right? So it also is a win for them. If they are the first ones, if the government says, listen, you guys can be the first ones to capitalize on this renewable energy resource, then why are they complaining? Because it'll also be like, I'm sure they'll make tons of money off of that too.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
It's not like they're not going to make money. It's not like they're going to go bankrupt or something. Like I know BP, I know a lot of these other like Chevron, etc., are investing in renewable energy sources. Actually, they're the first ones to do it because that's their sector, the energy sector, right? And they have the funds to do it. So it's smart on all accounts.
Yeah. The oil and gas companies are one, like, there's been a lot of hate against billionaires and stuff like that, right? But it's so funny because you never see the CEO of an oil or gas company get hate, even though those guys have been around for so long and manipulate so much more than you could ever think. But
that thing is funny, though, because I see a lot of people hate the general idea of billionaires, right?
Yeah.
But look at, like, real-life billionaires, right? People love Elon Musk. Richest man on the planet, right? People love him.
I think, okay, I have a separate Musk argument then. Keep going with your point, but I have a separate Musk thing.
Bill Gates, right? Sure. People generally like Bill Gates. He's like the Democrat sort of, he leans more left if you look at the things that he's been working on, the people he's been working with. So, but it's a lot of people from the left who hate billionaires, but they make exceptions for the most notable ones. You would think that like people like Elon Musk, Bill Gates would be hated on, right? Like you would think that because they're so rich, people wouldn't like them at all.
Yeah.
But it's weird that people don't like the concept, but they actually don't mind the individual. I think one exception to that is Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, I say Jeff Bezos gets
people
so
don't
much.
like Jeff Bezos at all.
Yes.
Steve Jobs was also loved, right?
Yes.
Like maybe not for his personality, but not solely for, like they didn't hate him because he was a billionaire. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's weird that there's this sort of I hate people who make a lot of money, but I also like the people who are notable for making a lot of money.
Here's my theory. Ready? I'm about to blow your mind. All right.
I'm ready.
So my Musk thing, when people go say like Musk's a dick, he's this blah blah blah. One, I just think he's smarter than nearly everybody.
He is smart. He's not a dick. I've watched a lot of interviews with Musk.
Him doing.
He's a very humble, down to earth guy for sure. I'm a big Musk fan though.
Yeah, me
disclaimer.
Too.
So like
I am too.
I'm biased.
I am too, but I'll say why is because and he does do a lot of other stuff. Like he comes on Joe Rogan's show and talks about it and explains.
And smokes weed. That's the
that
coolest thing you can do.
That was incredible.
That's the coolest thing you can do. That's like the most unelite thing that you can do.
Right. And he's obviously a meme lord. But to me, I read Musk had a biography done on him by Ashley Vance. It's very good. I recommend it if you're curious. And I've also read the Steve Jobs biography that was the basis for the movie. I like to read a lot. By Walter Isaacson. Fantastic. And they are similar in the sense that they weren't doing it for money. They weren't doing this. They were doing it to drive technology forward. And Musk genuinely believes, and you read the book, and I'm not bullshitting, like you see it, genuinely believes we need to go to Mars. He has, and it ties it together, right? You have Tesla for the renewable energy to stay here now. You have SpaceX, which is he's the first private people to send stuff to the shuttle, stuff like that. Like, that's incredible if you think about the amount of money. Like, do people understand how much it costs to build a rocket and then make the rocket work? Like, SpaceX almost failed completely. He had SolarCity, which is a solar power company that's now owned by Tesla. And my other Musk point is that he founded PayPal. He actually got out of the dot-com business, like the dot-com boom and bust, like, wealthy. And he went back in and almost lost Tesla. He came... I forgot the exact number, but he came so close to losing Tesla because he was dependent on bank loans and stuff like that, and that's why he's now CEO and has all his capital, and he puts in his own money. He risks all of that. But my point is that the billionaires who are liked, I think, and revered are the ones who want to drive technology forward. And Bill Gates has demonstrated that with Microsoft, obviously first, and software and redoing all of that, and now his foundation, obviously, which has been incredible, and he's actually been the UCF. I think my freshman year is at UCF visited Lead Scholars classes with the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation to discuss that stuff and talked about vaccines, stuff like that. And Jobs is another one where like we literally didn't have like the amount of work and drive that Apple did. Like the iPhone. Think about the iPhone. The iPhone is only 13 years old. Think about that. Like, and how important that was. And the iPod before that, and the Mac. So, like, I think it's more people that, to circle back to Bezos, I think people see Bezos as just like, where's my Amazon package? And like Bezos revolutionized how books were distributed first. That was Amazon's first thing, and then how commerce is done. But people don't see it that way because they're like, oh, I would have just gone to Walmart if it wasn't for Amazon. I think that I'm not saying I agree with that perspective, but that makes a lot more sense then I think, and maybe that's why he gets more hate or why he's not as well liked as the other three that we've brought up.
I think his image is also more so capitalistic in that sense, where he tries to go in and dominate any market that he's interested in.
Like Whole Foods.
Right. So
and the newspaper business as well.
It seems like the other three that you mentioned were more altruistic. Like, at least they came across that way. I'll tell you right now, Bill Gates was definitely, obviously, he wanted to drive like software forward, but to say that none of them are interested in money at all is complete.
Of course not.
Right? They all want to maximize their profits at the end of the day.
They were all CEOs for a reason.
But I think the way their image is perceived is, like you said, and that makes a lot more sense now why people like them. Is first, I think they don't come from a very rich family. They come from a middle class family. Yep. A lot of these people. And also, with the three mentioned, Musk, Jobs, and Gates, they all come across as altruistic. Because actually, I was reading into Bill Gates, and he had a similar image as Jeff Bezos did before he retired. So
interesting.
His post-retirement career has actually brought him a lot more, popularity.
Interesting.
Because if you remember. What was that? I think it was Netscape, right? The internet browser.
Yeah.
And basically what Gates did was with every Windows computer you bought, there was Internet Explorer. So it already came into it, right? And but that's illegal. So you can't monopolize a market like that. But by the time all the lawsuits and things were done, and they pay whatever compensation they have to pay, Netscape was done. Or I don't think it's called Netscape, but some sort of old internet browser.
Sure.
I forgot what it's called. But anyway, so in any business at that level, you kind of have to be cunning. You have to kind of bend the rules a little bit. Have you watched The Founder?
No, I have not.
So it details the rise of McDonald's.
Oh, okay.
And the real CEO was this guy called Kroc. I forgot his first name. His last name was Kroc. And he was pretty ruthless when it came to business, right? Like, he set up this contract with the McDonald brothers that was completely in his favor and not in their favor at all, but they thought it was just by the way he worded it. I can get into more detail if you want me to, but...
Yeah.
Oh, do you want me to?
I mean, you can if you want.
Oh, so basically, if you look at McDonald's, it's a very popular saying. They're a real estate business, right? They're not a restaurant business. So most of the money that they actually make is off the property rent that people who actually franchise the McDonald's from pay McDonald's Corporation.
Interesting.
But what Ray Kroc did was, I think first name was Ray. He told the McDonald brothers, "You guys will get the like 80% of the profits off of the food and like the actual products being sold at McDonald's, right? But you won't get any of the revenue off of the property."
It was Ray Kroc.
Ray Kroc, right?
Ray Kroc.
Perfect. So and that's where the real business was, but they didn't realize it because they were very good at like optimizing the McDonald's and like actually how it worked, the whole burger assembly line thing. They kind of brought Henry Ford's automobile and merged it with food and made McDonald's, right? The first real fast food chain, and they were very good at that sort of individual level. But they weren't the best at franchising or had that sort of business acumen that Ray Kroc did, because he was a failed entrepreneur for 50 years until he hit it big with McDonald's. It's an interesting story because his wife was with him the first the 30 years he was really trying to like make it as a businessman. He kept failing. She supported him throughout. As soon as he made it big with McDonald's, he ditched her and got someone a lot prettier. So
wow,
very
men are trash.
Ethically, not the best guy, right? But as a businessman, that's sort of what it sometimes takes when the competition is at that level and there's billions at stake.
Sure,
I'm sure all of these guys have done things that me and you would say maybe it's not the ethically best thing to do.
Well, and especially when like think about like you're trying to make the first iPhone, like it takes a special type of person to have the will to see that through and motivate employees to get that through. And even though a lot of employees came out and spoke and like
he was an asshole, right? Like
Steve. I think people though. I think one quote stuck with me from the book. Might not be a quote, but just a sentiment was that he was rude. He was terrible. But I would have never been to my full potential if it wasn't for him.
He's like that strict coach, that mean coach that brings the best out of you, right? And some people like that. Some people like the sort of professional, like, coddling, like, okay, you're doing a great job, positive words of affirmation, like constructive criticism. He didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
He broke almost all rules of business, right? Business, generally you do like delegation, there's managers, et cetera, et cetera. He was involved in every single aspect.
Yeah.
But even now, when you look at the iPhone, the level of detail, the presentation, the sort of aesthetics, the user interface, when you compare it to something like Android, that's, I believe, has been made very standard like any other products made, right? That level of detail and attention, like I read that when you're opening the iPhone case, right, the way it opens the case matches your heartbeat. So the anticipation that you have to open the product is matched by the actual box opening. Like that level of detail would never be accomplished when you're delegating and you have managers overseeing certain levels of production, because your vision will never, the more people you delegate to, your vision's diluted more and more, right? The more you do yourself, that's what they say, right? If you want a job well done, you do it yourself. He really took that to the next level. But that's why you still see that iPhone, at least in America, is the top phone. And across the world, it's considered the gold standard, right? So, like someone coming from India, right? Like my parents, not me, but someone who's visited.
Sure.
Androids are more popular. Nokias are more popular, right? Because of the affordability of it. But iPhones are viewed as a status symbol. If you have an iPhone, that means like you're sort of signaling that you're rich, right?
Okay.
With the other phones, it's more so, okay, this is affordable, like, etc. So although Androids may dominate that market because more people can afford it, that sort of gold top tier phone is still considered the iPhone. And there's a reason to it, right? Because Jobs put in so much effort and he had that vision to execute it, right? He had that sort of grand vision that before, it was phone's a phone, a calendar's a calendar, a clock's a clock. No one ever dreamed of coming up with a product like this.
True. That's what we need. We need to cancel coddling.
Yeah.
Cancel it. Be done with it. But we're at the hour and 15-minute mark.
Oh, wow.
My sir.
Hour and 50?
15.
15, okay.
Yeah, no, we do hour 15 another time. I don't have that type of quote.
No.
But, we talked about so much. We have so much more to talk about always. So, but it means we just got to come on for a third time, bro.
Yeah, we can definitely keep talking for like hours.
I know, we could. We have
No, but I understand. I feel like whoever's listening to this is probably like, okay, when is this going to be over now? It's been an hour and 15 minutes.
You guys are terrible. You're wrong about Elon Musk. Cancel Parshva. I know.
I'd love to hear what like people listening to this have to say about it. Like
me too. I'll put it in the title. I'll put billionaires something in the title so people listen.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so thank you again for.
Of course, it was a pleasure to be back on.